In this chapter, we will cover basic information on how to perform pre-harvest and daily harvest environmental assessments. This chapter is aimed at supervisors and food safety personnel who conduct field assessments. Let's first go over some background information. The company that you work or harvest for has implemented a food safety program. A food safety program is a documented set of activities based on industry and government standards and procedures aiming to minimize the risk of leafy greens contamination. One of the key activities required in a leafy greens food safety program is conducting environmental assessments. Each company conducts food safety environmental assessments on ranches where leafy greens are grown and harvested to check if the company's standard operating procedures are being followed. In order to be aware of the conditions associated with the production of lettuce and leafy greens, the fields where leafy greens are grown need to be periodically monitored. According to the Leafy Greens food safety standards, this monitoring is mandatory and is known as environmental assessment. This monitoring requires visual observation of field conditions with a focus on potential physical, chemical, and biological contaminants. This visual monitoring of field conditions is a formal food safety environmental assessment that needs to be documented and filed because it will be required during audits. Your job may include monitoring the fields and documenting the inspections. You should be aware that the information provided by these inspections is key for the company's food safety program. The information you collect during the environmental assessment is documented on forms, logs, or checklists. In this video, we will call this form checklist. This information will be used as evidence that you have an effectively managed food safety program in place on the ranch. You need to conduct the following assessments. 1. One is done the week prior to harvesting. This is known as the pre-harvest assessment and is conducted 1 to 7 days before harvesting. 2. The second one is the daily harvest assessment, and it must be done each day of the harvest before starting to harvest in that specific block. There is little difference between these two types of inspections. You will need to perform the following tasks in both. Walk through the entire field doing a visual inspection of the field. Answer the questions from the checklist that was provided. Do not forget to check for everything that is noted in the checklist and to carefully record all the information from your visual inspection. Immediately call your food safety professional if you see something that could represent a food safety risk to the fields. Forms, logs, and checklists are simple and easy-to-use documents that are used to ensure that specific food safety tasks are completed and specific information is collected. These documents help food safety professionals make certain nothing is ignored. They have questions or statements that direct you to visually assess the surrounding area and provide verification of your findings. Your food safety professional will provide you with a checklist that you will need to fill out when visually inspecting a field. Let's take a quick look at an environmental assessment checklist. This will help you to become familiar with the pre-harvest and/or daily harvest environmental assessments checklists. The first section of most environmental assessment checklists asks for the following basic information. General information: name of the person completing the inspection, date of inspection, estimated harvest date, ranch and lot, harvester name, product to be harvested, harvesting crew number or ID. The next section in any checklist is the core of the assessment. It is generally entitled Evaluation of Potential Contamination Risks. It includes a series of questions for evaluating many areas in the field that may be potential sources of contamination to leafy greens. Keep in mind that you always need to visually inspect the field before filling out the checklist and ask your food safety professional if you have any questions. The information in each checklist will vary from company to company due to the differences in their food safety policies, but most questions are yes or no, addressing the following points: evidence of animal intrusion in the block, low hazard and medium-high hazard, evidence of livestock grazing on immediately adjacent land, evidence of flooding, concentrated animal feeding operation, CAFO, municipal waste, toxic waste, landfill, etc., condition of water source and distribution system, employee hygiene practices, field sanitary facilities, unexpected adjacent land activity that will pose a risk to food safety, any other potential contaminants such as harvest equipment, product containers, sanitary operation of equipment, or sanitizer concentration. The last section on the checklist is used to record any corrective actions that need to be implemented in that specific location. A corrective action is a change or an improvement made in the field to address a deficiency or to eliminate causes of nonconformities or other undesirable situations in the fields that may pose a food safety risk to product. Most of the time, corrective actions include the creation of a no-harvest buffer or separation zone around the potentially contaminated area. However, the corrective action must be in accordance with your company's food safety plan and your company's policies. If any corrective action is taken, you need to document it in detail in the designated space in the checklist. In some instances, you must call your food safety professional before implementing a corrective action. Writing down the proper information is an easy but very challenging task. There are many good documenting practices that must be followed while filling out checklists. Here you have some of them. The information you provide on the checklist must be correct and accurate, and make sure you complete all sections. If you have any questions, such as not being sure of the proper name of the ranch you are assessing, call your food safety professional immediately. Do not use the ranch's nickname. The auditors do not know them. Do not fill out the forms in advance. This practice is not acceptable because doing so means that you are not visually inspecting the fields. Furthermore, this is considered falsification of records, which is a major deviation in a food safety audit. Keep in mind that you should always use permanent ink when completing a food safety checklist. The use of a pencil or erasable ink is not allowed. Whiteouts with correction fluid are not permitted for making corrections on the documents. Any mistake must be crossed out and initialed by the person making the change. Note that the original information must be legible. Now that we are done with the documenting section, we will walk you through the different common sections of a typical food safety pre- and daily harvest environmental assessment checklist and provide you with basic information on how to approach each section. Keep in mind that although most of them are similar, there are some specific requirements at each company. Let's start with the field sanitary facilities. Your field sanitary facility program outlines the location and frequency of cleaning the units, supplies, signs, maintenance, servicing, and response of the unit. It is your job to get to know this standard operating procedure, or SOP, since your environmental assessment covers a detailed inspection of the field sanitary units to evaluate if the company's procedures are being followed properly. During the assessment, you should visually inspect the following points for all toilets and sanitary facilities. Location. Make sure the location of the units minimizes the impact from potential leaks and/or spills, while still allowing access to employees and access for cleaning and service. An industry best practice is to locate them away from the field. Make sure they are placed according to your company's policy. Number of facilities. There should be at least one restroom per 20 employees, located within a quarter of a mile, or no more than a 5-minute walk from the workplace. If during your assessment you find too many employees and too few restrooms, call your food safety professional immediately to take a corrective action. Finally, men and women's restrooms may be needed upon the number and gender of employees. Cleanliness. If the units are not clean, corrective actions need to be followed. You must open the door and look inside each toilet unit to make sure things are satisfactory. The sanitation and service log should also be up to date. Supplies. Enough water, soap, toilet paper, paper towels, and a trash can should be available at all times. It is your job to look after these supplies. Facility signage. There should be a poster to remind employees to wash their hands after using the restroom before returning to work in the field. Look for it when assessing the facilities. Facility daily cleaning and servicing. Establish the frequency of toilet and hand washing facility maintenance and sanitation. Has everything been cleaned and sanitized? Has this information been recorded on a cleaning log? Facility maintenance. The sanitary facility must be in good condition and properly maintained. If you note any issues related to this, you should document them in your checklist. Response plan for major leaks or spills. If there is a leak or spill, you should follow your company's leaks and spills response procedure. Keep in mind that infractions and deviations are assigned to companies that miss any of the points that have been previously discussed. Make sure to carefully look at all points. Take your time to walk around and inside the units while you are in the fields doing the assessment. Maintain documentation of maintenance and sanitation schedules. Your job can be the difference between safe or contaminated products. The next area that needs to be assessed is personal hygiene, and your environmental assessment checklist includes specific questions for demonstrating evidence that field employees comply with the personal hygiene practices outlined in the company's food safety program. Regardless of the questions included in your checklists, you must make sure that all employees working in the fields follow your company's policies. Some of the most basic personal hygiene general policies include, but are not limited to, the following. Employees must come to work clean and wearing clean work clothes. Proper hand washing. Removal of jewelry and other objects. Snacking, eating, drinking, chewing gum, smoking, and using other tobacco products only in designated areas. Proper use of protective garments and clothing, such as aprons, arm sleeves, hair restraints, and gloves. Proper use and storage of harvesting hand tools, such as knives. Personal items should be stored away from food production areas. No spitting, urinating, or defecating in the field. Workers must show good personal health. They should have no symptoms of diarrhea, vomiting, jaundice, sore throat with fever, and other diseases. And finally, all wounds and sores should be covered. When looking at employees, you should always think as an auditor, and remember that foremen and crew leaders must also follow the company's personal health and hygiene policies at all times. Remember that good personal hygiene is critical for minimizing the risk of leafy greens contamination. The conditions of the water source and distribution system must be checked thoroughly in the environmental assessments. Remember that water is an important raw material in the leafy greens industry, and it can become a major source of contamination. Water is widely used in the industry for many tasks, such as irrigation, pesticide use, hand washing, drinking, cleaning and sanitizing of equipment, and harvesting utensils. All these are opportunities for water to become a source of contamination. There are different sources of water: wells, canals, reservoirs, and municipal. This water is distributed to the fields in many ways. Regardless of the source or distribution system, all water must come from a secure source, and the water used throughout the operation must meet certain quality control parameters, so it does not become a vehicle for the spread of disease-causing microorganisms and chemical contaminants. At a minimum, you must make sure to check the following. The water source is in acceptable condition. All tanks are clean and all hoses are off the ground. Chlorinated water and chemical tanks are marked. Pipes and pumps are well maintained and are working properly. Water sources are free of trash, debris, and animal hazards. There are no potential contamination risks from reservoirs, canals, or any other open water sources. For instance, no dead animals, chemical leaks, etc. in the canals. Your company may use other tools, such as sanitary surveys, to check the water sources and distribution system. A sanitary survey is an inspection of the entire water system, including water source, facilities, and equipment, for the purpose of identifying conditions that may result in microbial contamination. This assessment must be done prior to using any water source, or if your microbial testing counts at that location are high or out of specification. The next area in the assessments is flooding, which is the flowing or overflowing of a field with water, beyond a producer's control, that can contain disease-causing microorganisms. Leafy greens in proximity may be contaminated if there is direct contact between flooding water or contaminated soil and the edible portions of leafy greens. The Food and Drug Administration considers leafy greens in contact with flooding waters to be adulterated. A field temporarily flooded due to irrigation practices is not considered flooded unless it has a high probability of contributing to microbial contamination. Pooled water, for example, rainfall, which accumulates from saturation of the field, for example, not runoff or overflow, is not likely to contain microorganisms of significant public health concern and is not likely to cause adulteration of the edible portion of fresh product. It should not be considered flooding. If you have spotted a flooded field that is about to be harvested, contact your food safety professional. Wild animals, livestock, or domestic animals can be carriers of disease-causing microorganisms. Leafy greens fields and blocks are susceptible to animal intrusion because leafy greens are generally grown in rural areas that may have adjacent wetlands, wildlands, or parks harboring wildlife. Any type of animal in the field may lead to crop contamination, posing a significant risk to leafy greens since contamination can happen through physical contact or fecal matter. However, animal hazards can be categorized in low and medium to high hazards. During the assessment, it is very important to look for any evidence of animal intrusion in the block and to make sure that the field is free of animal hazards. Animal hazards are feeding, skin, feathers, fecal matter, or signs of animal presence in an area to be harvested in sufficient number and quantity to suggest to a reasonable person the crop may be contaminated. If evidence of animal intrusion is found in production fields, assess the hazard and potential risk. Animal intrusions should be categorized as low or medium to high hazard. An example of a low hazard might be a sign of animal intrusion into the leafy green production area by a single animal or solitary bird with minimal to no fecal deposits. Corrective action for low-hazard animal intrusion shall be carried out according to your company's SOP. If the animal intrusion is a medium to high hazard, contact your food safety professional. Corrective actions for medium to high hazard animal intrusion shall be carried out per the accepted LGMA metrics and include food safety buffers and not harvest areas. Always document your findings and any actions taken. Take a moment to review the following chart to learn to assess animal hazards in the field. What if fecal matter is found in the field? If you find evidence of fecal matter, which may be a medium to high risk upon the situation, immediately report it to your food safety professional, who will conduct and document a food safety assessment and suggest a corrective action according to your food safety plan. Harvesting cannot begin again until the area is evaluated by your qualified food safety professional and he or she makes sure that the area is clear of contamination. Do not harvest any product that comes into contact with fecal matter. Do not harvest any product within a 5-foot radius of contamination, and always be aware of flagged areas. These represent buffer zones around any animal activity and will help to adequately control or minimize the risk of leafy green contamination. If evidence of animal hazards, low or medium to high in the production block, are not discovered until harvest operations begin, stop harvest operations. Initiate an intensified block assessment for evidence of further contamination and take appropriate actions as previously discussed. If evidence of hazards are discovered during the production block harvest operations and the harvest machine has been potentially contaminated by contaminated product or feces, clean and sanitize the equipment before resuming harvest operations. Require all employees to wash and sanitize their hands or gloves before resuming harvest operations. If contamination is discovered in harvest containers, such as bins or totes, discard the product and clean and sanitize the containers before reuse. Let's move on to another area. Leafy greens contaminants may also come from neighboring fields. We take all the necessary measures to minimize risks within our company, but we also need to assess what is going on in the adjacent block of land. The environmental assessment should also include a checkbox for assessing adjacent land activity. Potential contamination sources in adjacent fields include, but are not limited to, manure storage, compost storage, concentrated animal feeding operation, CAFO, grazing or open range areas, surface water, sanitary facilities, septic tanks, and composting operations. Some of these sources have been discussed individually, but what if you suddenly get to a field and encounter something unexpected, like a pile of soil amendment containing animal manure, untreated manure next to a wellhead, a decayed carcass on the edge of your field, a septic tank leaking next to a field, runoff or soil leaching, a pile of trash and/or debris in an area adjacent to the field that is being inspected. Be alert and look around during the assessment. If you spot any adjacent land activity that will pose a risk to food safety, do not start harvesting. You should call your food safety professional so that a more comprehensive assessment is conducted and corrective actions can be taken. Look around. You may not find anything in the field, but there may be risks nearby. Grazing livestock or domestic animals can be another source of contamination. If you find evidence of livestock grazing on land immediately adjacent to the field, you should make sure that they are located a minimum of 30 feet from the edge of the crop or water sources, unless adequate barriers are maintained. The food safety standards or metrics we follow suggest this distance. However, this distance may be either increased or decreased depending on risk. If grazing is downhill from the crops, the buffer distance may be decreased. However, if grazing is uphill from the crops, there is an opportunity for water runoff through or from grazing lands and for soil leaching, so the buffer distance might need to be increased. The final decision for setting a buffer distance will be made by your food safety professional. In summary, fencing and other physical barriers, such as berms, diversion ditches, and vegetated strips, can be employed to prevent intrusion from domestic animals and control runoff. Before we are done, let's review some other sources of contamination to leafy greens in the field that you should be aware of during the environmental assessments. Do not forget to document any of your findings in the proper section of the environmental assessment form. Hand harvesting equipment. One way to prevent leafy greens contamination is to keep the hand harvesting equipment, such as knives and coring rings, clean and sanitized, and also to make sure that all employees always use harvesting tools in proper condition. Harvesting machines can also be a source of contamination. Clean and sanitize them properly to prevent cross-contamination. Pay special attention to food contact surfaces. Any farming equipment that comes into contact with raw manure, untreated compost, waters of unknown quality, animal hazards, or other potential sources must be cleaned and sanitized following the company procedures. Notify your food safety professional if you spot potential contamination in the harvesting machines. Containers and packaging supplies. When walking the fields, make sure that harvesting containers are used to carry harvested product only. No foreign materials, such as soda cans, tools, nails, or clothing can be placed in or on the containers. It is your job to verify that containers and packaging materials are always stored on pallets or truck trailers, not directly on the ground. Containers and all packaging materials must be inspected before use. Look for loose pieces, pests and pest droppings, damage, trash, and debris. If you find anything, report it in your environmental assessment form. Leaks and spills. Harvesting equipment must be free of fluid leaks, excess grease, or lubricants. If you spot a leak or a spill, stop harvesting and report it immediately to your food safety professional. Any leafy greens that come in contact with dirt, grease, or oil must be discarded and the action documented. Blood. You and your coworkers must make sure that blood and/or body fluids do not get on any harvested and unharvested product, knives, or containers, such as boxes or baskets. If blood gets on any leafy greens, these leafy greens should be thrown away immediately. Reusable packing containers must be cleaned and sanitized, following the company's blood cleaning policy. Look for cuts on employees' hands or fingers, and follow the company's blood and bodily fluids policy. Do not forget to document your findings in the environmental assessment form. Glass. Glass or glass containers are not allowed in the field or near the harvesting machine and crews. If you find any broken glass in a leafy greens container, do not just take the piece of glass out. You must throw this product away and report it immediately to your food safety professional. Chemical contaminants. If you see any chemicals that are not labeled, used incorrectly, or not stored properly, note it on your assessment form and take an immediate corrective action. If you do not know what corrective action needs to be applied, contact your food safety professional. Trash and waste. Waste and trash are sources of contamination and should be placed in designated containers. These containers should be emptied daily and more often if needed. Do not forget to check trash and waste during your environmental assessment. The better we do our job with environmental assessments, the better we can protect public health and minimize the risk of contaminated leafy greens. The following are some basic recommendations for doing a good job when assessing the fields. You may know the fields well. However, you must go out and physically walk the fields you are assessing. Do not be overconfident when doing inspections. You must still carefully walk through all fields, visually inspect them, and then record everything in the checklist you are using. Be prepared because any ranch may give you a surprise at any given time. Pay close attention to the process of filling out the forms, logs, and checklists. And when doing so, focus solely on this activity to avoid making mistakes. Do not fill records in advance or falsify information. Do not cut corners or take shortcuts. Your foremen are a key part of the team. Therefore, you have to make sure they also follow all the food safety procedures at all times. Food safety is a serious matter. If you are in doubt or have any questions, do not hesitate to call your food safety professional. He or she will have the right answers. Remember that you are generating very important information that will help your company to make key decisions. We all have the same goal, to assure that every consumer gets safe leafy greens. This is the end of our discussion about environmental assessments. Thank you for listening.